You know, I keep seeing these notes about such and such was inspired by art from Ralph McQuarrie, or this was designed by Ralph McQuarrie. I just find it amusing that we're still going back to the man's work and designing stuff based on. I mean, I know this is like 5 years ago at this point, but still. So I like this episode a lot. Weirdly enough, because it touches on the more metaphysical side of things in a way that I usually don't like in Star Wars. But I like it here because not only does it make sense for reasons I think I'll try to discuss here, but also because it's all about the character. Kanan, it's completely understandable why he is so terrified of the dark side. The old Jedi Order, they were terrified of the dark side, mostly because of their own fear, of course, but also because they were following an institution which they felt was the only solution. You know, if we don't do this, then we will drown, kind of a mentality. But Kanan has actually seen the dark side and what it can do in a very literal and personal way. He has actually, I mean, obviously he probably wasn't there at the Jedi Temple, although we'll find out more about his backstory in the future, I believe. But what we do know is that he has seen a galaxy which has been crushed because Jedi went over to the dark side, and he has seen what the dark side itself can do. So he's terrified of this. And I don't know if he's fully cognizant or not of just how much of Anakin there is in Ezra. And not in a literal sense, of course. Anakin really was kind of a unique and special individual, but certainly leaning in that direction. It's also worth noting that this whole situation is immensely dangerous. Even ignoring the obvious reasons why, Kanan is not an expert. He is not a Yoda, and even Yoda was wrong. He is someone who is bumbling around in the dark. If anything, I feel that is the one reason Kanan might actually succeed in being a decent teacher for Ezra, because he is teaching while learning, which doesn't always work, but I think for Ezra's style, I think that will actually work out well. But it's still dangerous. For all of the many things that we don't know about the Force, and I myself have talked at length, in depth, across many videos and many streams about the Force. The one thing we know about the Force is that it's not consistent. But another thing we know about the Force is that in almost all of its portrayals, the dark side has a very severe seesaw effect. Excuse me. In other words, the more you tilt, the more you tilt. And thus, even though this is a potentially wonderful and beneficial situation, it would be very easy for Ezra to start tilting, well, and never stop. This, of course, leads us to the fact that there's a temple in Lothal. Of course there is. I don't mistake me, I'm once again with the idea of keeping things local. I still think that's a great idea, and I hope the show keeps doing that at least for a while. But I also want to point out something else. I've been paying attention to a lot of the things Kanan has been saying in his training of Ezra, and a lot of it boils down to one sentence: trust the Force. I started thinking about that. I don't know how old Kanan is, but he can't be that old. He's probably 30 at the absolute highest, which means he was a teenager when everything went to hell, at most. It's probably more likely that he himself was a kid when he managed to survive the Purge. So that brings me to an interesting thought. The only things he's ever had to help him with the Force and becoming a Jedi and training and blah 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 are the training and ways of the Old Republic, which demonstrably failed, and just trusting the Force. And that's it. Just that was the only teacher he had. And thus it makes sense to me that this is the only wisdom he really has to embark upon Ezra. Now he'll mention some of the things he learned in school, don't mistake me. But that's why I think the central pillar of his discussion is always about putting your faith in this cosmic entity. Because that's what he did. This is just me speculating, by the way. I just want to mention one other quick line there. When Ezra enters the temple, Kanan says, "Good luck." I don't know how much thought and effort the writers of this show put into the nitty-gritty details of the construction of their narrative. But if I was doing that, I would have specifically written "good luck" because of the fact that he is so different, to really help hammer in the point just how different he is from Obi-Wan and his infamous quote, "In my experience, there's no such thing as luck." So, I also want to make a quick aside. Oh my God, dead people freak me out. These are the masters whose Padawans never returned. Now, that's probably a little bit of artistic license, but I have to admit, I kind of like that idea in a weird, sort of mystical kind of a way. Because, not because of the mysticism, not because of the mythos, but more because of the fact that that implied a level of trust and connection, which is very, for lack of a better word, intimate. It's very personal. These people, too often, the connection between Padawan and Master is basically one of a servant and a overlord. And it's portrayed this way in a lot of the various media when it comes to Star Wars. I like that this shows that these masters did care tremendously and personally about their Padawans, to the point of not only being willing to risk death, but actually accepting death at the fall of their own Padawan. It's just a nice little touch. That's all I wanted to add to that. So let's talk about the Force Vision section. I actually don't have much to say about the specifics of it, because it's a Force Vision. There's only one part of it that really matters when it comes to specifics. You ever notice how there's just these places which seem to be, for lack of a better way to put it, heavy in the Force across Star Wars? If I was to parallel this to most other fantasy works, I would say these would be functionally ley lines or nexus points for Force energy. Places where the Force is so dense, for lack of a better way to put it, that it actually causes these kind of things to manifest. Which brings me to an interesting question, and I really want comments on this one. I want your guys' response to this. Do you think it is literally a metaphysical realm that more or less literally alters where you are and what you're doing? Or do you think it is all up here, pure illusion, and all that's happening is that you are being fed these illusions as you're roaming a single room, right, in a single corridor or whatever? Personally, I lean a little bit more towards the latter, not only because it makes more sense to me, but honestly, that feels more in line with how the Force kind of works. The Force isn't really a reality bender, not in the sense that some magic is in a lot of fiction. The Force is more of a reality alterer in a very minor ways, bending the rules, not completely breaking them. And of course, in addition to that, Force visions are a very well-established aspect of it and can be very vivid and very powerful. So that's why I lend in that direction. But again, I am very curious of your guys' thoughts. So, as with all well-written visions, what these do is they show a stark insight into someone's self. Now, what's funny is I wrote all these notes down that I'm about to read to you. 1, 2, 3, 4. I wrote 4 notes down really quick there about what we see of Ezra before he actually says it himself out loud. I was just like, oh, come on. Ruining my analysis here. Ezra is unloved. Ezra is useless. Ezra is weak. Ezra is alone. Now, I'm not saying that I'm not trying to insult him. I'm saying these are the ashes that Ezra carries on his shoulders. These are these burdens that weigh him down. And this is what runs through his mind, his deepest core and central self. And this is shown very demonstrably throughout the whole thing. He can't do anything. At best, he is pitied. No one really cares about him. And when he's alone again, he's going to be alone for good this time. All of this just kind of showcases the mentality of what Ezra Bridger is going through. Now, all of that is good and awesome, but what I kind of like is Kanan has a little bit of presentation here too. It's not as much, because obviously the focus is on Ezra, but we see what Kanan's big fear is. Not that he has any fear in Ezra, but all his fear is for himself. That he, a child Jedi, who never really had a chance to develop or grow in his powers, and never had a society or communal backing in order to be able to develop in, all of that, and that he actually lost his way, nice little foreshadowing bit there, that he is not a good master, that he's not a good trainer, that he's not someone who can do right by Ezra. Now, I like that not only because it makes perfect sense and lines up with the character, but also because that is, let's be honest, pretty much exactly what Obi-Wan's fear was, too. Twice, if you think about it. So, then Yoda shows up, voiced by the always awesome Frank Oz. On the one hand, and I already complained about this with the R2-D2 thing, flooding Yoda in at this point is a bit early. On the other hand, having Yoda be basically a voice of the light side makes an enormous amount of sense. Remember, this is the post-humbled Yoda. This is the Yoda who has learned his lessons from the prequel trilogy. He has had the most harsh and brutal lesson possible, nearly died from it, and a whole lot of other people died from it too. So he is basically what I like to think of as awesome Yoda, because from this point on, he's just awesome, like full tilt. So having him be that voice makes a lot of sense, but it also makes sense if we go back to that ley line concept I mentioned earlier, that Yoda can literally sense them through the tremendous power, the amplifier, if you will, of this nexus point. The only catch here is that if Yoda can sense them, logically speaking, certain other Jedi should, and by Jedi I mean Sith, should probably be able to sense them too. We'll see if they ever follow through on that. Nevertheless, I don't think they ever 100% say this, but I like to think that this was our Yoda, the real Yoda, not a vision, not an illusion, over on Dagobah, meditating or doing whatever he does, and sensing Ezra and Kanan, and reaching out to them with his voice and with his wisdom. Because I like that idea, and that's really where I want to go with that. So Ezra goes out and he starts talking about, I want to make the Empire pay, and he's like, is this about vengeance? Is that the Jedi way? And Ezra's like, no, of course not. It's just... And what I love is the simplistic human honesty of what Ezra just says. Can I just say something really quick? I firmly believe that a post-humbled Yoda would have taken care of Anakin. As I've said many times, Anakin had the deck stacked massively against him. He had everything going against him for him to turn into the dark side and become Vader. And I mean from an in-character perspective, from an in-universe perspective. But I think that a post-humbled Yoda could have reached out to him and helped him. Because that's exactly what he does for Ezra here. And arguably that's what he does for Luke later. Ezra has much the same general mentality as Anakin. I want to help people. I want to protect people. I want to take care of people. But the perspective is just enough different that you can see the variance between the two. Anakin was ultimately fairly self-focused, and a lot of that was anger-based. Ezra is more outward-focused, looking out rather than in. And then, of course, he is also... both of them very much wanted to take care of people and help people, and to grant them the lives that they felt they deserved. And that is, I think, one of the reasons I like this parallel. Well, it's easy to say that Ezra is simply Anakin Light, and I have heard this argument been used in the past. I don't think it's quite a fair comparison, because it's more like it's an easy mentality to understand for anybody. Because that's the point, isn't it? For most interpretations of the Force, that strong desire to help others is a knife's edge. Because it's so easy for that passion, for that power, for that drive to push you into the more aggressive side of the Force, to the more dominating side of the Force. Right? And thus, I like how Ezra just kind of naturally stumbles into this as Yoda is basically just sitting there like, And notice Yoda doesn't preach at him. This is why I mentioned the post-humble thing. He doesn't preach. He preached at Anakin. He gave Anakin basically useless advice and told him... He didn't just give him the wrong answer to the question. He told Anakin the question itself was wrong. He gave him doctrine, and it didn't help. It made things worse. But instead, with Ezra, he just kind of goes, and lets him talk it out, and lets him get it out, and just actually is there as an advisor, and thus helps Ezra to do what Ezra needed to do, reach his own conclusion. And then he receives his own Kyber crystal, and that's awesome. So then we cut to the thing. Zeb mentions it's been a few weeks. I sure hope that's an exaggeration. But then he shows his unique lightsaber. Now, can I just say that I have always said, since way back when the EU was first starting, back in the 90s, I've always said that we should see more varieties of the lightsaber concept. Light spear or light whip, or the dual saber we eventually saw, the varying blade length thing that became a thing in the Jedi Academy trilogy. I've always loved that idea. That's one of the reasons I'm even with the spinning thing that the Inquisitor had. So Ezra having the blaster saber... that actually makes a large amount of sense to me, and is actually such a cool concept, I'm kind of with it already. Even though I haven't seen it in action yet. So I want to reserve some of my judgment there. But just as a concept, I'm on board. That's all I got for this one. Hope you guys enjoyed. See you next time.